The moment you see yourself clearly, the game of life changes forever. You're not your thoughts. You're the one watching them. Most people are living yesterday on repeat. Are you one of them? Most people spend their entire lives believing they are their thoughts, their emotions, and their stories. They wake up in the morning, and before they even open their eyes, the mind has already begun playing the old movie, the same stream of memories, worries, complaints, and plans. Without realizing it, they step into the role of the actor inside that movie, never questioning that they could be something greater than the script that's been running for years. But there is another part of you, a deeper, quieter awareness, that is not bound by the thoughts it notices. It is the part of you that can observe without judgment, that can witness the rise and fall of emotions without becoming consumed by them. This is what it means to recognize the observer within. When you begin to recognize the observer, you start to notice a subtle space between the events of your life and your reaction to them. That space is where freedom begins. In that space, you are no longer reacting from the conditioning of the past. You are consciously choosing how to respond in the present. For most people, this space is almost invisible because they've spent years training themselves to react instantly. They hear a certain tone in someone's voice, and anger arises before they've even considered what was said. They see a certain expression on a loved one's face, and fear or defensiveness takes over without conscious thought. But when you cultivate the observer, you slow time down, not in the physical sense, but in the mental and emotional sense, allowing you to see the thought forming, the emotion rising, and the choice appearing. You cannot access the observer by thinking about it. Thinking is what keeps you inside the loop of the mind. The observer emerges when you begin to notice your thoughts without being pulled into their story. Imagine sitting beside a river watching leaves float downstream. Each leaf is a thought, some pleasant, some fearful, some repetitive, some completely new. When you are identified with the mind, you're not sitting on the bank, you're in the water, clinging to each leaf, following it wherever it goes. But when you step into the role of the observer, you remain on the bank. You see the thoughts passing, but you no longer feel compelled to hold on to them. This is where real transformation begins, because as long as you believe you are the voice in your head, you are trapped in the same patterns that voice has created. The voice can only repeat what it already knows. It's built from the past, your memories, your beliefs, your conditioning. And because it's built from the past, it can only recreate versions of the past. That's why change feels so hard for so many people. They're trying to create a new future while still living from the mind that only knows the old one, but the observer is timeless. It isn't bound by the past, and it doesn't limit what is possible. When you live from the observer, you start to experience moments of stillness, clarity, and choice that you've never noticed before. Recognizing the observer also changes the way you experience emotions. Most people don't actually feel emotions, they get lost in them. When anger arises, it takes over the entire system, and before they know it, they've said or done something they regret. When fear arises, they shrink back from opportunity, never realizing it was just a feeling passing through. But when you are the observer, emotions become something you notice, not something you become. You might feel anger, but you also notice the sensation in the body, the tightening of the jaw, the heat in the chest. You might feel fear, but you also notice the shallow breathing, the tension in the stomach, the urge to escape. And in noticing, you create that space again, the space where you can choose. The observer is also the doorway to understanding that you are not your body, you are not your mind, and you are not even your emotions. You are the awareness that experiences all of those things. This understanding is not just an idea, it is a lived experience that deepens every time you practice stepping back from identification. It is the difference between being in the storm and watching the storm from a place of safety. The storm may rage, but it cannot sweep you away when you are anchored in awareness. One of the most powerful ways to cultivate the observer is to practice being fully present in ordinary moments. This is not about forcing yourself to focus, it's about noticing. Notice the sensation of your feet touching the ground as you walk. Notice the sound of your breath. Notice the texture of the cup in your hand as you drink. Every time you notice, you are strengthening the muscle of awareness. And over time, this noticing extends beyond the external senses into the internal landscape of your mind and body. You begin to notice the subtle rise of a thought before it becomes a story, the whisper of an emotion before it becomes a storm. In this way, recognizing the observer is like turning on a light in a dark room. The furniture was always there. You just couldn't see it clearly. Your patterns were always running. You just weren't aware of them. But once the light is on, you can see the room for what it is. And once you see, you can choose whether to rearrange it, clean it, or simply leave it as it is. This is why awareness is the foundation of all true change. You cannot change what you cannot see. The observer allows you to see. When you truly embrace the observer within, life begins to feel different. The external world might be the same, but your relationship to it changes. Situations that used to trigger you lose their grip. Thoughts that once controlled you now pass through like clouds. And in that freedom, you start to experience yourself not as the character in the story, but as the one who can write a new script altogether. From the moment you wake up, if you do not consciously interrupt the cycle, your body and mind begin running the program of who you were yesterday. You wake up, feel the same emotions, think the same thoughts, and take the same actions. The mind replays the familiar mental script, and the body, conditioned by years of repetition, follows without question. This is the unconscious self at work, an identity built out of repeated patterns, beliefs, and emotional responses. It operates like a background program, executing the same code day after day without requiring your awareness to keep it running. The challenge is that this unconscious self can become so dominant that you start believing it is the only version of you that exists. The unconscious self is built through repetition. Every time you respond to a situation in the same way, you strengthen the neural connections in your brain that support that response. If you react with frustration in traffic every day, the brain wires that response deeper. If you feel anxious every time you're about to speak up in a meeting, your body memorizes that fear, storing it as a familiar state. Over time, your thoughts and feelings become predictable, almost automatic. The body learns the emotional patterns so well that it can trigger them without the mind even needing to think about them. This is why you can wake up in a perfectly neutral state, recall a past problem, and within moments feel the same anger, sadness, or stress you felt months or years ago. The body has been trained to return to that emotional baseline. To break the habit of the unconscious self, you first have to see the patterns for what they are. This means paying attention to your inner dialogue and the emotional states you live in most often. Many people have lived in a state of stress for so long that they believe it's just who they are. But stress is not an identity, it's a chemical state your body has become accustomed to. The same is true for other recurring emotions: resentment, fear, hopelessness, self-doubt. They are not fixed parts of your personality. They are programs running in your nervous system. The body resists change because it prefers the familiar. The unconscious self is not concerned with your growth. It is concerned with keeping you safe in the only way it knows how, by repeating what's known. Even if what's known is painful, it feels safer than the unknown. This is why when you try to act in a way that's different from your conditioning, your body and mind may push back. You might feel resistance, discomfort, or even fear when you begin to think new thoughts or practice new behaviors. This resistance is not a sign that you can't change. It's a sign that you are stepping beyond the boundaries of the unconscious self. Breaking the habit means interrupting the automatic loop before it completes itself. When a familiar thought arises, instead of following it into the same emotional state, you pause, you observe, you remember that the thought is a memory from the past, not a prediction of the future. When the body begins to signal an old emotion, you resist the urge to react the same way you always have. Instead, you bring your awareness into the present moment, anchoring yourself in the here and now. Every time you do this, you weaken the neural connections that support the old pattern and begin to rewire your brain for something new. You cannot simply think your way into change, you must embody it. The unconscious self is rooted not only in thought, but in the body's chemistry. This is why emotional awareness is so important. If your body is addicted to the chemistry of anger, it will find reasons to trigger that states. Small annoyances will become big frustrations, and your mind will justify why you feel that way. The same is true for sadness, anxiety, or guilt. When you start noticing that your body is pulling you into a familiar state, you have an opportunity to stop feeding that loop. One of the most powerful ways to do this is to practice becoming comfortable with the discomfort of change. When you resist an old reaction, the body will send signals to pull you back. Tension, restlessness, an urge to give in. This is the moment where most people revert to their old selves. But if you can stay present in that discomfort, breathe through it, and choose a new response, you send a powerful message to both your brain and body. We are no longer living by the old program. Visualization and mental rehearsal can accelerate this process. By repeatedly imagining yourself responding in new, empowered ways, you begin to prime your brain to act differently before the situation even arises. The brain doesn't distinguish much between vividly imagined experiences and real ones. The same neural pathways are activated. This means you can practice becoming your conscious self long before you're tested in real life. Over time, this mental training makes the new response feel more familiar than the old one, and the unconscious self begins to lose its grip. As you break the habit of the unconscious self, you may notice that certain people, places, or situations seem to pull you back into old ways of being. This is because your environment can trigger memories stored in your body. A certain room might remind you of a difficult time, causing old emotions to surface. A certain friend might trigger the version of you that existed years ago. Recognizing these triggers is part of the process. You cannot control every external factor, but you can control your internal response. The more you practice living consciously, the more you realize that the unconscious self is not a fixed entity. It is simply a collection of choices repeated so often that they feel automatic. And because they are choices, they can be unchosen. You can teach your body to feel joy instead of stress, gratitude instead of resentment, courage instead of fear. But it requires consistency, presence, and a willingness to step into the unknown, even when every part of you wants to retreat to the familiar. Every person carries within them an emotional blueprint, a set of deeply ingrained patterns that dictate how they feel, react, and interpret the events of their life. This blueprint is not random. It is constructed over years through experiences, beliefs, and repeated emotional states. From childhood, each significant moment, each wound, each joy leaves an imprint in the nervous system. Over time, these imprints harden into a map the body and mind follow automatically. The blueprint determines not only how you respond to life, but also the kind of life you unconsciously create. If your emotional blueprint is dominated by fear, you will unknowingly seek out situations that confirm that fear. If it is shaped by joy and gratitude, you will naturally move toward experiences that reflect those feelings. The challenge is that most people are unaware they are living from a blueprint created in the past. They believe their current emotional state is caused by what's happening now, but in reality, much of what they feel is an echo from old programming. A simple comment from someone might trigger deep shame, not because of the words themselves, but because those words resemble something you once heard in a moment of vulnerability. A minor disappointment might unleash a wave of hopelessness because it touches the same emotional wound you've carried for years. The emotional blueprint is like a lens through which you see the world, and if that lens is clouded by old pain, it colors everything in your present. Reprogramming this blueprint begins with awareness. You must become a student of your own emotions, noticing not only what you feel, but also where it comes from. This requires slowing down enough to observe the chain reaction, the event, the thought it triggers, the feeling that arises, and the way your body responds. Most people skip directly to the reaction. Someone says something, and the body immediately floods with chemicals that match an old emotional state. But when you start to see the sequence, you create the possibility of interruption. The body plays a central role in this process because emotions are not just mental experiences. They are biochemical states that the body memorizes. When you've felt a certain emotion over and over, your body becomes conditioned to it. It learns to produce the corresponding chemical cocktail on cue. This is why people who have lived in stress for years can feel restless or even uncomfortable when life is calm. The body is craving the familiar chemistry of adrenaline and cortisol. It's not that they want to feel stressed, it's that their emotional blueprint equates that state with normalcy. To reprogram the blueprint, you must teach the body to feel something different. This requires deliberately introducing new emotional states and sustaining them long enough for the body to recognize them as familiar. Gratitude, for example, is one of the most powerful states for rewiring the nervous system. When you consistently generate feelings of gratitude, not just thinking about what you're grateful for, but actually allowing yourself to feel it deeply, you begin to overwrite old patterns of scarcity, fear, or resentment. Over time, the body learns to expect this new chemistry, and the blueprint shifts. Visualization is another potent tool in this process because the brain does not distinguish strongly between what is vividly imagined and what is experienced in reality. When you repeatedly rehearse a future where you feel confident, loved, abundant, or healthy, you are essentially running new emotional programs in the mind and body. If you combine this with the genuine emotional experience of those states, you create a powerful signal that begins to override the old blueprint. The body starts to recognize this new state as safe, as normal, and as something to maintain. But the reprogramming process is not always comfortable. The body will often resist the change, pulling you back into the old emotions because they are familiar. You might find yourself suddenly flooded with thoughts and feelings that match your old blueprint just when you're making progress. This is not failure, it is the body's way of testing your commitment. If you can remain aware and not collapse back into the old state, you send a powerful message to your nervous system. This is not who we are anymore. Another key to reprogramming is emotional honesty. You cannot shift what you are unwilling to acknowledge. If you have built your life around avoiding certain feelings, shame, grief, abandonment, they remain active in your blueprint, influencing you from the shadows. Facing them means allowing yourself to feel them fully without letting them define you. It's stepping into the storm with the awareness that you are the sky, not the weather. When you do this, the intensity of those emotions begins to dissolve and their hold on your blueprint weakens. This process also involves re-examining the beliefs tied to your emotional states. Every recurring emotion is supported by a narrative, whether conscious or unconscious. If your blueprint is rooted in unworthiness, it will be underpinned by stories like "I'm not good enough" or "I'll never succeed." Reprogramming requires challenging those stories and replacing them with narratives that align with the person you choose to become. This is not about forcing positive thinking. It's about creating beliefs that are supported by your new emotional experience. As you reprogram your emotional blueprint, you begin to notice shifts in your external life. People respond to you differently. Opportunities that once seemed out of reach begin to appear. This is not magic. It is alignment. When your internal state changes, you perceive and act differently, which naturally changes the course of your life. The old blueprint was attracting and reinforcing experiences that matched its emotional tone. The new blueprint does the same, but with a higher frequency. The most profound realization in this journey is that you are not the product of your past emotional patterns. You are the architect of your present and future ones. The blueprint is not fixed. It is malleable, responsive, and constantly being updated based on the emotional states you live in most consistently. By choosing those states consciously, you take authorship of your life in a way that the unconscious self never could. When the mind and body are out of alignment, life feels like a constant push against an invisible current. You may think inspiring thoughts, set ambitious goals, and make promises to yourself. But if your body is still living in the emotional past, those thoughts never truly take root. The mind may be imagining a future of abundance, health, and fulfillment, yet the body, conditioned by years of stress, doubt, or fear, continues to broadcast signals that contradict the vision. This mismatch creates an internal conflict, an energetic tug-of-war that keeps you stuck in the same cycles. Synchronizing mind and body means bridging this gap, bringing your thoughts and emotions into harmony so they both support the same reality. The mind leads with thought, but the body anchors that thought with feeling. If you imagine a goal, but the emotion tied to it is anxiety or disbelief, the body will treat that vision as a threat rather than an opportunity. It will flood you with stress hormones, tighten your muscles, and prepare you for survival rather than creation. This is why so many people set goals, but find themselves sabotaging them without understanding why. Their mental vision and their emotional reality are playing different games. True alignment happens when the body feels the way the mind is thinking, when your inner emotional climate matches the external reality you're working to create. To synchronize the two, you first need to become aware of the emotional signals your body is sending. Thoughts may be quick and fleeting, but emotions are slower. They linger in the body, creating a baseline state that influences everything you do. If your baseline is tension, doubt, or impatience, those emotions will subtly color your thoughts, pulling them back into familiar territory. You might start the day imagining success, but if your body still feels unworthy or unsafe, within hours your mind will unconsciously adjust its thinking to match that emotional state. This is the body leading the mind rather than the mind guiding the body. The process of synchronization begins by consciously generating the emotional state you want to live in, even before the external circumstances reflect it. This is not about pretending or faking positivity. It's about teaching your body to experience the future before it happens. If your goal is to create more joy in your life, you practice feeling joy now, in this moment, without needing a reason. If you want abundance, you cultivate the feeling of gratitude and security before the material conditions change. When the body experiences the emotional reality of the future you're imagining, it begins to accept it as familiar, even normal. This is the essence of aligning thought and feeling. Breath is one of the most direct tools for bridging mind and body. The breath is both voluntary and involuntary, which means it can be a conscious link between the two. When your breathing is shallow and rapid, it signals to the body that you're under threat, no matter what the mind is thinking. When you slow your breath, deepen it, and make it rhythmic, you communicate safety to the body, creating the conditions for calm, clear thinking. This physiological coherence is the foundation for mental and emotional alignment. Meditation and mindfulness practices deepen this connection by bringing awareness to the present moment. In meditation, you quiet the habitual noise of the mind and become more attuned to the subtle states of the body. You may notice areas of tension, patterns of restlessness, or waves of emotion that rise without any clear trigger. By observing without judgment, you allow the mind to witness the body's state without being consumed by it. Over time, this observation builds a bridge. The mind becomes more responsive to the body, and the body more receptive to the mind. Synchronizing mind and body also requires consistency. Just as a muscle needs repeated use to grow stronger, alignment between thought and feeling deepens through repetition. Each day, you practice holding a vision while sustaining the matching emotional state. You're reinforcing a new pattern. The nervous system adapts to this coherence, making it easier to maintain over time. Eventually, what once felt like effort becomes your natural state of being. This alignment does more than just change your internal experience. It shifts the way you interact with the world. When your thoughts and emotions are synchronized, your actions become more intentional and fluid. Decisions are no longer made from a place of fear or doubt, but from clarity and confidence. People sense this coherence. They respond to the energy you're projecting, often without even knowing why. Opportunities seem to arise more naturally, not because the universe has suddenly changed, but because you are now tuned to recognize and act on them without internal resistance. There is also a physiological dimension to this harmony. When the mind and body are in sync, the heart and brain enter a state of coherence, where their rhythms align in a smooth, balanced pattern. This coherence supports optimal functioning of the nervous system, improves emotional regulation, and increases mental clarity. In this state, you're not fighting yourself. You're channeling all of your resources toward the same direction. However, synchronization is not a one-time achievement. It's a living practice. Life will continually present situations that challenge your alignment. Stress, unexpected setbacks, or old triggers can pull the body back into past emotions, and the mind will follow if you're not aware. The skill lies in noticing the shift quickly and bringing yourself back into coherence. You do this by returning to the breath, reconnecting with your vision, and consciously generating the emotional state that matches the reality you choose to create. As you continue this practice, the line between the mind's vision and the body's experience begins to dissolve. The future you've been imagining starts to feel like the present. You carry yourself differently, think differently, and speak differently, not because you're forcing it, but because it has become who you are. The mind leads, the body follows, and together they create a unified field of energy that draws your outer world into resonance with your inner one. Every transformation begins with a choice, the choice to no longer live as the echo of your past, but as the author of your future. This choice requires a deep shift in identity, because you cannot create a new life while clinging to the personality that shaped the old one. The future self is not simply a better version of who you are now. It is a completely different state of being, built from new thoughts, new emotions, and new actions that align with the reality you wish to experience. Creating this self from the inside out means you begin the change internally, long before the external world catches up. Most people wait for external circumstances to give them permission to feel differently. They say, "I'll feel happy when I get the job," or "I'll feel confident when I lose the weight," or "I'll feel abundant when I have more money." But this approach keeps them trapped in the loop of cause and effect, forever waiting for the outer world to change before they can change internally. The paradox of transformation is that the inner shift must come first. You must feel the emotions of your desired future before it has physically arrived. This is not wishful thinking. It's training your mind and body to live in the frequency of the future now, so that your actions, perceptions, and decisions begin to match that reality. To create a future self, you must first define it clearly. This is more than just setting goals. It is about crafting a vivid, multisensory experience of the person you intend to become. What does this future version of you think about daily? How do they walk into a room? How do they respond to challenges? What emotions do they live in most consistently? You are essentially creating a blueprint, not just of external accomplishments, but of the inner state that sustains them. The more specific you are, the easier it becomes to recognize when you are acting in alignment with that self, or when you are slipping back into the old identity. Once you've defined this future self, the next step is to mentally and emotionally rehearse being that person. The brain does not draw a sharp line between real experiences and vividly imagined ones. The same neural pathways are activated in both. By repeatedly visualizing yourself living as your future self, you begin to program your brain to expect this new reality. But the rehearsal is not just mental, it must be emotional. You bring the picture to life by feeling the joy, gratitude, confidence, or freedom that your future self experiences. This is how you begin to embody the future before it arrives. The body, conditioned by the past, will resist at first. It will try to pull you back into familiar emotions and behaviors because they feel safe. Old habits will surface, old thoughts will reappear, and you might feel the urge to abandon the vision altogether. This is where awareness becomes critical. The moment you catch yourself acting from the old self, you stop, take a breath, and choose again. Each time you do this, you weaken the hold of the past and strengthen the neural and emotional patterns of the future self. Your environment will also play a role in shaping this new identity. If you remain surrounded by people, places, and situations that reinforce the old self, you will feel the pull of that familiar gravity. The future self often requires new environments, physical, social, and mental, that support your vision. This doesn't always mean cutting people out of your life. It means intentionally placing yourself in situations that encourage you to think, feel, and act in ways that align with who you are becoming. Daily rituals can anchor the future self into your present reality. These could be practices like meditation, journaling, visualization, or conscious movement. The key is that each ritual reinforces the emotional and mental state of the person you want to be. Over time, these practices train the nervous system to sustain the new identity without constant effort. The future self becomes less of a vision you have to reach for and more of a natural state you live in. As you embody this self more fully, your perception of reality changes. Opportunities that once seemed invisible become obvious. Challenges that used to trigger fear now spark curiosity. You respond differently to people, and they respond differently to you. This is not coincidence. It is the natural outcome of living from a higher state of consciousness. Your energy, decisions, and actions are now broadcasting the signal of your future, and the external world begins to reflect it back to you. The shift also changes your relationship with time. Instead of waiting for the future to bring you the life you want, you begin to live as if it is already here. The separation between where you are and where you want to be starts to dissolve. You're no longer chasing something outside of yourself. You're expressing something that already exists within you. This is the essence of creating a future self from the inside out. You become the cause of your reality rather than the effect of it. When you commit to this process fully, the old self begins to feel foreign. The thoughts, emotions, and reactions that once defined you no longer fit. You may even feel a sense of loss, as though a part of you is fading away. This is natural. Transformation requires releasing identities that no longer serve you. It's not about erasing your past, but about no longer letting it dictate who you are. You can honor where you've been while fully stepping into who you are becoming. The more you live as this future self, the more natural it feels, until one day you realize you are no longer practicing, you are living it. The thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that once required conscious effort are now automatic, not because you force them, but because they have become your new baseline. And as this internal reality solidifies, the external reality rearranges itself to match it. Self-awareness is not a single step but a layered process, one that begins with recognizing the observer within, breaking the patterns of the unconscious self, reprogramming the emotional blueprint, synchronizing mind and body, and consciously creating a future self from the inside out. Each of these stages builds upon the last, gradually shifting you from a life run by the past to a life directed by intentional choice. When you learn to observe your own thoughts and emotions without judgment, you create space to choose differently. When you break free from the automatic habits of your unconscious self, you open the door to new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. When you reprogram your emotional blueprint, you free your body from the chemistry of the past and align it with the emotions of the future. When your mind and body are in harmony, your inner and outer worlds begin to move together in the same direction. And when you fully step into your future self, you stop waiting for change to happen and become the very source of it. The journey of self-awareness is both deeply personal and universally transformative. It asks for courage, consistency, and a willingness to step into the unknown. But as you live from this heightened state of awareness, you begin to experience life not as something happening to you, but as something you are consciously shaping. This is the true power of knowing yourself, not only to understand who you have been, but to decide with clarity and intention who you are becoming.